Доброго дня, шановні присутні. Дякуємо всім, хто долучився до нашого сьогоднішнього заходу, тема якого – Україна у міжнародному кліматичному процесі. На початку дозвольте представитися. Мене звати...
Good afternoon, I'm Oksana Alieva. I'm a coordinator of climate change program of Guidable Fund in Ukraine. And also I would like to present our speakers who will share their opinion on the topic. This is Svitlana Grynchuk, Director of Department of Climate Change, Atmosphere Protection and Preserving the Ozone Layer, Ministry of Ecology and Natural Resources of Ukraine. Oleksiy Ryabchyn, MP, Batkivschyna faction and of the Supreme Council, and Iryna Stavchuk, expert of the National EcologicalCenter of Ukraine. So, why we gathered here? As you may know, recently there were negotiations on climate change in Marrakesh and Morocco. It was 22nd meeting on climate change. The Ukraine is the participant of this project, and why a lot of attention has been drawn to this, because in the framework of this meeting, there was the first meeting of Paris climate agreement participants that was signed in December in Paris. And Ukraine also signed the Paris agreement and was one of the first countries. We are top 20 countries who quickly ratified the agreement. And we thank the parliament and the government for this. And for us, it was really important to take part in this at this meeting of this Paris Agreement participants, and I believe that we are interested in the results. What were the results of this meeting and how it is going to influence on climate policy in Ukraine? And our meeting today is to clarify the situation. What was the goal of Ukraine and whether this goal was reached. And our representation in Morocco was provided due to official governmental delegation, and many of those who are present here, Svitlana Grynchuk, Oleksiy Ryabchyn, Taras Anatolievich Peshka, many people who are present today in this court, they participated, and there were many experts of civil society who took part in the conference as observers. Iryna Stavchuk will represent this group of experts, and also there are a lot of people in this hall who were at these negotiations, and we will be glad to hear their opinion. And now some technical aspects. I believe that now we will ask questions, and I have several questions for you, and then for 30 minutes we will have a Q&A session of the media who are in this hall, and after this, all interested in the topic, all experts will join the discussion and present their opinion on this topic. So we start. What issues we are going to discuss during today's mission? And the first, I ask to each one of you, what was the main result of Marrakesh that you would define as the main event and the main result, the main outcome of this meeting, and what changes will be made due to this in the climate policy in Ukraine, whether we will have some updates. And if you don't mind, I will give the floor to Svitlana, and the first two issues that I outlined, I hope that all participants are interested what was the aim of the official delegation when they visited Marrakesh, and whether this goal was achieved. And also, on the request of Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and we are thankful for them, to them, I ask the speakers to speak slowly because we have simultaneous translation here. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to greet you here. And I always say this during meeting, that this issue of climate change is of interest to so many people. It shows that Ukraine is in the trend and it moves into right direction. And I hope that our ministry is also moving in the right direction. I'm sure about it. About the event that happened in Marrakesh, starting 7 till 19 November. So this was an important event for Ukraine and for the whole international community, because this was unprecedented event and agreement that address all and call on all the countries, all people, to fight climate change, to preserve what we have now, and to work in order that our children and our grandchildren had better future. And about technical aspects of this negotiation process. First, I would like to say that during this period there were 3 major events. 22nd session of UNO framework conference and the conference of the parties that are Kyoto parties, and the first part of the first session of the conference of parties that are the stakeholders in the Paris Agreement. And the framework of there were some sessions and additional meetings on technical aspects, and also a special working group on Paris Agreement that we will call a supplementary body. So, and the first conference of the parties of the Paris Agreement was in the highlight of the attention, and we know that the countries signed this and ratified this agreement and provided the instruments to the UNO Secretariat, and 75% of countries that have major emissions. So I am glad that Ukraine was not only the participant of this process, but, as Oksana told us, was one of the first countries who ratified and became a party of Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, as we know, it is directed to reinforce the implementation of those principles that were started in the framework of Convention of UNO on climate change, and it calls on every party to act urgently and to take obligations, and this is the first agreement that radically differ from those provisions that are in the Framework Convention and in the Kyoto Treaty. This is the first agreement that really proposes differentiation and the division of the countries, and proposes to unite efforts of everyone. And the major task of the session in Marrakesh, the conference in Marrakesh, was to continue the work on what was reached in Paris, because in Paris it was a historic event, and it was really necessary that this year in Marrakesh they would establish those principles that countries reached, and the work was started, active work, with high rate in order to fill this Paris Agreement with the right mechanisms that would allow to reach global global goals, and that would allow to reach those principles to which they came up to in the Paris Agreement. So there was a lot of active work involved, and there were many aspects, and some parties tried to return to what was to copy the procedures and mechanisms that were in Kyoto Treaty Agreement. But it is important that this attempts, the majority of parties, they stopped this because the majority of countries who participated, they want to see new differentiation, and the countries should be obliged in the same way and have the same responsibilities, but we all move to the common goal, and of course we take into account the peculiarities of countries, but now everyone do the same things. So we work according to the same principles, and this is the main in the Paris Agreement and in Marrakesh meeting, that all the countries started to work to reach these global goals, and everyone should participate and contribute to reach this goal.
Thank you for your answer. I would like to ask one more specifying question. Whether Ukraine had some situations when we had to specify typically Ukrainian issues in course of discussions. First of all, we were in line with those countries which wish to work together for the sake of the joint objective. Ukraine had comments on the 6th article of the Paris Agreement and about reporting on implementation of Paris Agreement. Ukraine participated in all the working groups in Paris conference. There was one issue dealing directly with Ukraine, which we fortunately resolved successfully. This was non-compliance, technical non-compliance of Ukraine with Kyoto Protocol. From August 2015, the register of green gas emissions was not operational in Ukraine due to technical reasons, and Ukraine failed to submit its green gas emissions effects on time. So Ukraine managed to Ukraine managed to do this. We managed to contribute a lot of effort. Had many consultations, provided explanations. We managed to resume the work of that register, and we produced actually this report, provided necessary information, and now we have to finalize the procedure, and I think this situation is favorable for Ukraine. I think that all people in this room are satisfied hearing this, and now we can say that Ukraine complies with its international commitments related to the environmental issues. I think that that's important. Now I would like to give the floor to Oleksiy Ryabchyn. we would like to know your opinion. What was the most important for you at the conference, and whether you believe that decisions which were made and the decisions which will be passed in the immediate future, whether those decisions made in Paris will influence the environmental policy in Ukraine. I'm Oleksiy Ryabchyn from Batkivschyna faction. I belong to the Fuel and Energy Committee. I deal with renewable resources, green energy. I'm happy. I used to work in the UCMC before I become an MP, and I'm happy to see this the full house for discussion about environmental issues. We understand that in a country which is undergoing the war events, anti-terrorism work, but and we understand that the environmental issues could not be the most important, but nevertheless, we are very proud that our parliament was one of the first parliaments in the world which ratified Paris Agreement. I'm very happy about this fact. I'm very grateful to the government and the presidential administration for cooperation. Actually, this was done not due to the populism. And when we are done, there's some people said that maybe military events in the East are more important, but the issue of leadership is important here. We cannot transform the country without having changed our approaches in many areas, especially in the environmental area. And the issue of leadership is important when we wish to show that we try to apply new approaches in order to gain sustainable energy sector development, to show that Ukraine is a reliable partner, and to revive positions which were lost. When Ukraine, when the Kyoto Agreement was passed, Ukraine was among the leading countries in implementing Kyoto Protocol. When Kyoto Protocol was passed, when you involved Japan investments, when you had a good team from the Ministry of Environment which worked in that direction, you took the leadership. You were a bright example for us. And now we try to take this leadership back. We had the first site event held during the last 6 years. This was an event devoted to Ukrainian situation at the Paris summit, and this just shows that counteraction to climate change provides a lot of opportunities. In many countries, the climate change is differently communicated in different countries. For some countries, the climate change per se is important, while for Ukraine it is precondition to discuss the related issues, the unbundling of the economy, the decoupling, etc. Back in Paris, when we signed that global Paris Global Agreement, we tried to understand whether there would be political will to implement this agreement. Then later in Marrakesh, we understood that the political will is here in place because there were a huge number of leaders, state leaders, national government representatives, and we approached to Japan, Poland, the European Union delegation, other countries. Poland will be the next country which will host the next meeting devoted to implementation of Paris equipment. This shows that we have many competitors who wish also to become leaders in implementation of Paris equipment, and we should contribute much to implementation of the agreement. Having ratified one of the first, this Paris agreement, Ukraine actually assisted in kickstarting the process because many countries were rather reluctant to sign it. Many countries hesitated, not being sure whether we have proper mechanism to implement Paris. And Ukraine is a country in war which suffers a lot of hardships. When it signed and ratified the agreement, this inspired many countries to take this commitment. I hope that, like me, you feel that for the first time, Ukrainian environmental community this year should be satisfied. You cannot request for more ambitious goals. I think that we satisfied the biggest expectations of civil society even before they were expressed. Can assure you that we always will try and find the balance of the national interests and the requirements of the environmental community. Now I would like to give the floor to Iryna Stavchuk from the National Environmental Center to assess whether you are satisfied with the degree how you implemented your role in Marrakesh and whether you're satisfied with the accomplishments. First of all, I will describe what we believe is the key event in Marrakesh. On the last day of negotiations, 47 countries announced that they would transfer to 100% of renewable energy by the mid of the century. This is interesting because this time that commitment was made by Mongolia, Morocco, Vietnam, Marshall Islands, Morocco. These are one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. They understood that the consequences of climate change might be extremely harmful for them, but in order to restrain the temperature rise at a level of 1.5 degrees, this very important steps should be done. In order to implement Paris Agreement, almost all countries in the world by 1950s have to transfer to renewable energy sources.
градусів.
This will allow to keep the temperature rise at the level of 2 degrees. So all the countries said that we do not have any other way out. Only having transferred to 100% renewables, we would be able to implement Paris Agreement. As for Ukraine, within 1 year, even last year before Paris Agreement, we had very resentful attitude to the renewables, to gradual decrease in greenhouse emissions. We started very cautious discussions about closing mines. And after 1 year, after Paris Agreement, we observe that more and more international institutions withdraw their investments from coal and put them into renewables. In some countries, the renewables energy becomes competitive on commercial level to the nuclear and heating generation. Thus, renewable technologies became affordable. The nuclear energy could not be an alternative because it is a very long-term project and because it requires special storages for nuclear waste, and it is rather expensive. So the renewables might be a commercial alternative in a situation when coal is not an option due to the climate change, due to the global warming. Now, when the energy strategy of Ukraine is under development, we try to understand what should be our main focus. Either we will think about conventional sources or and this will strengthen our dependence from neighboring countries, or we will look carefully at the renewables. As NGOs, we believe that renewables is a good option because this means energy security, this means creating more jobs, and this is environmentally sustainable. We do not see better alternatives. So what Ukraine should do now, Ukraine should revise its contribution to the Paris Agreement. In 2012, before the crisis, before the war, emissions were at the level of 390 tons per year, while the target for 2013 is millions of tons. In 2030, we should not increase the level of 550 million tons. This is a standard scenario without any energy efficiency, without any special policies about renewables. I think that all the countries plan to review their national contributions during 2018-2019. I think Ukraine has a plan and prepared to this process. Also, Ukraine would like to make this process as transparent as possible.
And no one knows what discusses it, and no one knows whose responsibility is this, and we do not know whether the goals of the Paris Agreement are taken into account. So our address to the government, we should raise this question in order that the energy strategy took into account Paris Agreement. So we have many plans ahead of us, and I would like to discuss the latest issue because I saw that Svitlana and Oleksiy nodded, and because they agreed that the development of strategy till 2030 is going on behind closed doors. That's why can we announce that we create a coalition of civil society, Ministry of Ecology, Parliament, and we will provide our joint recommendations and will develop our consolidated position, our proposals that the issues of climate change and the Paris Agreement be included and in this renewed strategy and further documents that will regulate this area. And the ministry is, of course, have many regulations, and I am and the committee, we carried out different meetings on renewable energy and strategy and low carbon development and energy subsidies that should be provided for renewable energy projects. And we prepare a new roundtable on the role of automobiles, and this will be included also, and we invite everyone to the round table that we will hold together with the ministries, and we ask the Ministry of Ecology to participate, and the changes to the strategy and the use of electric transport and in Ukraine, the use of electric transport increased, but we do not see infrastructure and regulation for this transport. And we were to Norway, and due to Bilan and Joe, the representatives of this are present here, and we saw the situation there. The government stimulates the use of electric vehicles, and also there is free parking around the city, and also you can freely get to the city. You can get to the city if you are using gas. You should pay some tax or contribution, and electromobile, they do not do it, and the electromobile, they can use the lines of public transport. So this is a good use of electromobiles, and I'm the member of Fuel and Energy Committee. I don't know how the strategy is developed. As I understand the strategy, as in 2012, the strategy is developed together with McKinsey company consultants who were invited, and they now provided, I don't know whether they provided their recommendations, and our maybe the strategy will be branded by one of our institutions and will be presented as a strategy that was developed by Ukrainian government that is, I believe, is not acceptable, and I believe that should be public discussions. The public should know the situation, and the provisions of climate agreements should be taken into account, and nuclear and gas lobbyists' requirements should be corrected. As a responsible politician, I understand that we will use nuclear energy and coal and gas. We cannot get rid of it, and despite this, we should have a strategic goal. And during one of the round table, we said that until 2035, we will have 20%, and we can do this. We can reduce down to 20% the use of energy and reduce emissions down to 20% from that was in 2012. So this is the ambition, and then you can do it. And we carried out this round table together with our German colleagues, and till 2035. Is it possible? Yes, now it looks just fantastic as fantasy, and we cannot even imagine. But a lot of new technologies appear, and if they said that you can, in 2016, you can sit with your smartphone and to provide information right through the internet and to broadcast all these programs through internet, we would say previously that this is impossible. And we should believe in scientific progress, and we should prepare the infrastructure, and we should increase our institutional capabilities, because it won't be automatic. We should attract investment and be ready to plan those things, and we are in this process, and we hope that this issue of energy strategy will be balanced, concerning and synchronized with the ecology strategy and synchronized with economic strategy and the low carbon strategy. And for this, we need political leadership. Without it, nothing happens. And lastly, I would like to say that in America, they synchronized it 5 years ago. They had the same situation as we have now, and the strategies they competed, and in its essence, they are competing. And because of Obama's political will, he appointed the right people, and he got the result. They started to use the same figures in order to balance, and they shared their views, and this is difficult, but it yields good result for business, for investment, for the development of technologies, for science, and we should do it also. Thank you. I would like to say that on the 13th of November, there should be third package announced on energy union, European energy community, and one of the requirements to the EU countries will be that the energy and climate requirements, this should be a united document. Maybe you can tell us about the updated strategy and what should be done in order to coordinate with the climatic obligations of Ukraine.
This is a uniform process. Our commitments in line with Paris Agreement and our internal climate strategy, energy strategy, the country development strategy. For Ukraine, it's impossible to make real commitment based on Paris Agreement, having no idea what we can do. having drafted all the strategies which should be internally coordinated with each other, we'll be able to produce our national contribution. And in order to be able to do this, we have to carry out some calculations to base our strategies at the input data and on some policy, what is important. These days, at one of the discussions in the cabinet of ministers, where ministries describe their priorities. The Ministry of Environment mentioned that climate change and sustainable energy development is a priority for them. We were very pleased to hear this, and we discussed the trends in international climate process, and we're pleased to hear from the CMU members that we should bring together, should merge together writing of energy strategy and anti-climate change strategy.
Навіть так сказати, і просувати.
That is what I keep saying. We should assist even the government to develop their strategies, to assist them with our findings, with our methodology. I think that the Marrakesh process once again had shown many people in this country that we cannot lag behind the international trends and cannot stay aside in this process, because we would never be able to join it later. I think that at this very optimistic statement, we may open Q&A session with the mass media representatives. Please mention your name and then your question. Good afternoon. I am head of the Ukrainian Wind Association and editor-in-chief of the Terminal magazine. Oleksiy answered a big part of my questions, but nevertheless, you know what's going on in the nuclear energy sector. We have distorted our relations with Russia, and we have big issues in this sector. The second issue is with coal imported from the occupied territories. Now the question: these are favorable conditions for development of renewable energies. Do you think that those two favorable factors could promote development of renewables? Maybe this could be even more than 20% by 2030. I agree with you fully. I believe I'm one of the greenest MPs in Ukrainian parliament. I think that we should become green, not just in energy sector, but in machine building sector. We should increase the added value of our machine building. We have a lot of young people interested in development of renewable sources who wish to live in harmony with nature. But here we step in the area of business interests. Businesses that produce jobs, pay taxes, produces green energy. The biggest issue is how the state interacts with this business. Currently, we have decentralization at political level, but we do not have energy decentralization. People are more dependent on the monopolists in energy sector. We should decentralize energy sources. People should be able to install solar batteries, etc. Currently, I work with PRP on the project of draft law about energy cooperatives. Cooperative stations, when several villages can unite their efforts and their funds to install a windmill and to produce energy for local needs, and then sell in excessive energy. Also, we have some typically Ukrainian lock-ins. All our engineering workers are dealing with the heavy on heavy industry, but you cannot request from them to calculate national contributions. You cannot ask the small bus driver to win Formula One racing. At the moment when our presidents will state that Ukraine has the counteraction to climate change as its priority and green energy as its priority. In this case, they will come. We have good green tariffs, but we have the risk of war, and even despite of this, investors may come. So we need political will from the country leaders. In Marrakesh, we have heard this. The United States used to be global leaders in the process. They allocated much resources. They institutionally did much, and the American diplomats all around the world, because they believe that should be Obama legacy in the future. Without political leadership, it's not possible. I'm happy that in the Ministry of Environment we have good leadership in this issue. I'm personally very grateful to Stavchuk. But in the Ministry of Energy, I do not see any unit dealing with renewables. There are just 2 or 3 people collecting statistics. In many countries, they have climate change envoys, while in Ukraine, this is the Ministry of Environment, which deals with the climate change diplomacy. But this is not sustainable, so to say. The climate change and renewables are issues which brings together too many issues for the country development. We have one more question. Arkan Arkhizyanov consulting in Marrakesh. They had to implement some rules and procedure in line with Article 6.7 about cutting down the emissions and compensation for that. How the issue will be resolved, and what about Ukraine's position in Annex 1 of the Convention? Thank you for your question. You're right. Very intensive discussions were about Article 6, non-market mechanisms of the market, non-market mechanisms of the Paris Agreement. Discussion of this article was one of the key discussions. So all the countries agreed that the mechanisms should be developed further. We have started this work. The countries agreed that in Article 6, like in many other articles, the main idea is in differentiation. We should not divide between Appendix 1, Addendum 1, Addendum 2 countries. One country should impose restrictions, other countries should not. In Article 6, it was clearly seen that each country should act in line with its needs and in line with its conditions. But I think that having key experts here, it would be wise to give the microphone to the experts. Would you please explain about on this issue a bit more?
First, this is my deputy request to the ministry. My colleagues asked what is the difference between Kyoto Protocol and Paris Protocol. There is two, because there were two annexes. And we believe that Ukraine is a developed country, or a developed country, or developing country, or the country in transition. So we should communicate to inform people more, and we should find out what it really is. There is such a need. Yes, agree. And answering your question, 6 or 7, this is not such. There is no such provisions. 6.2, if you are speaking about 6.4, if you are speaking about mechanisms for reduction and mitigation, this is 6.4. And really, as Svitlana said, these three mechanisms, and there are three mechanisms. 6.2, this is joint approach, 6.4 centralized mechanism, and 6.8 non-market approach. And also there is Article 5, one more mechanism, and it provokes many discussions. So the mechanisms, they were not elaborated, and everyone was surprised because there were many requests from the parties, and some of them came after the conference was started. So all parties, and the last thing I remember, it was on the 8th when the conference was in process. So, so some countries, they made submissions, but some countries, they were not able to do it, and this is a serious work, and there are prospects, and there will be one round up to 17th of March, and there will be some workshops and seminars and roundtables, unfortunately, and they say that we do not cooperate closely with the public, and we are glad that there were observers at the round tables, and those countries that are developing, they didn't want, they said no, only parties, and we will discuss only among the parties, and this will be in May, this workshops and round tables, and after this, we will be able to say what mechanisms will be. And a preliminary, and Svitlana told us about it, there is a big wish to remove all the mechanisms except the mechanism of clear development, and there is great push, and the developing countries, they wanted all those mechanisms that connected with the activities, and by joint effort, we have a clear space for the mechanism for the content of 6.4, and we have the opportunity to cooperate on 6.2. So we should consider these mechanisms as interrelated, but what will be their content, no one can say it clearly. So our view is 6.4 is the centralized mechanism that is the golden standard at the international level. It's not golden standard, it's and 6.2 is broad cooperation as parties agreed with minimum limitations and minimal regulation concerning environmental integrity, and 6.8, this is the basis, this is the base where it all will be going on. So we agreed that this was the moment that everything will be like this. So I will add several observations. The negotiations were difficult, and not all the countries ratified Paris Agreement, and the decision was taken that the process will be controlled until 2018 by the Conference of Framework Convention, and for this 2017 they plan to have the meeting in the framework of the Conference of the Parties of and the Paris Agreement in order to make conclusions of the negotiations that will be next year, and until 2018 no one expects this result before, and there's two differentiation as it was in the Kyoto Agreement or in Convention. There is no such differentiation, and in Paris Agreement there are no annexes, there is no formula about the groups, and the discussions start to have this differentiation in the framework of Paris Agreement. I take part in negotiation less than Taras Anatolyevich, and I know what it will lead to. It will lead to collapse. That's why this differentiation issue for Ukraine, this is an ambiguous situation, because Ukraine is a developing country, the country with transition economy, and for us it helps us because at the moment we have a lot of questions that can be solved without this principle of differentiation. Thank you. I'm sorry, but we should give the opportunity to speak to those who are here, and then we will have the discussions off records, and then you will be able to speak about it. So if you have questions, please.
Oleksiy, Экономична правда. I have a question to Ms. Grynchuk. How do you see future interaction between different execs executive bodies in terms of implementing monitoring, environmental monitoring, and energy policy. Unfortunately, we do not have basic data about atmosphere pollutions. Also, restructuring of the mining sector. Whether you have any vision as to this issue, whether maybe you have some ideas here or maybe some steps already, but as of today, the most obvious is to build up interrelated strategies and to maintain dialogue between the Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Environment. Today's structure allows us to communicate via the Cabinet of Ministers. Speaking to the EU partners, I asked them the question, how did you, how you acted? And they said simply, well, we just united energy and climate strategies together. Because if you try to develop them separately, they immediately start to conflict with each other. We have not produced the official request that we suggest to bring both ministries together, but I think it would be logical to have renewable energy under the environmental ministry, because it's logic. The climate change should be under the Ministry of Environment. But as of today, we try to coordinate our position with the Ministry of Energy, because as a country we have no right for mistakes. Whether you have any developments, whether we have a dialogue, we came to agreement that we will have joint working groups, and we agreed that we will participate in development of the energy strategy. I would like to add politically, how do I see the strengthening of institutional capacity? Please do not take this as a criticism on behalf of the Batkivschyna faction to the government. I communicated a lot of things in Marrakesh and asked them a lot of questions, and heard a lot of experience. In Colombia, by the way, they in Colombia, a set of sectoral ministries were integrated in one under the purpose of low carbon approach. This was Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy, and some other ministries. Actually, this is similar to having the Ministry on Euro-Atlantic integration. These were people who were awarded decent salaries, and they restructure existing practices in the ministries. Let us look at the Ministry of Utilities and Regional Building, Housing, etc. Let us try to integrate this into the low carbon strategy development. I'm very proud that in cooperation with Biol Foundation and I'm happy that in the ministry we have a coordinator in the low carbon development. Our parliamentary committee cooperates much with all these experts, all these people, making this policy transparent. And another request to the executive authorities is to prepare energy diplomats who will supervise this process. Having stayed in these meetings, I understood that institutional memory, this personal memory, is important because these people are allowed to promote the national interests. In some delegations, they have up to 50 people in their membership, and they were able to find solutions in situations. While the Ukrainian delegation, which was not numerous, was rushing from one side to another. So the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Energy should not struggle between themselves trying to cope with this issue. Maybe there should be either Prime Minister on this issue, or we should study international experience about institutional capacity. Some years ago, we had the national agency devoted to this issue. Maybe we should revive it, but without corruption, of course. Just the last question from the audience.
Two questions. Natalia Guzik, World Fund of Nature. I have a question to Svitlana. You've mentioned that there is communication between Ministry of Ecology and Ministry of Energy. Do you have on the agenda, do you discuss climate aspects of strategy, and are other aspects are included? For example, the influence of renewable energy on ecosystems. Thank you for this question. And the second question. Good afternoon, everyone. European Energy Union, Ukraine. Brief question. I know a lot about Kyoto Protocol. So now we have 2016, and there are plans to reduce emissions of CO2 for 20%, and how it can be realized in practice, for what money? How will business do it? Taking into account that mechanisms of financing, or bonuses, or grants, that these mechanisms will appear only in 2018, and taking into account sad experience of pension fund, how not to how to prevent the errors of the predecessors. Because there were state agency, national agency in the process of realization, implementation of the provisions of the Kyoto Agreement. Do you plan? How many questions do you have, actually? So these are brief questions. Are you going to impose a tax, European tax, on emissions? And as in Poland, they created the Bank of Investment in Renewable Energy and thus reduce CO emissions, greenhouse gases emissions. So about the renewable energy impact on environment. Thank you for your questions. The first question, the answer. Now all the departments that deal with these issues of ecology policy, they all are involved in the analysis of energy strategy and preparation of their proposals. The proposals will be prepared not only on climate, and this is correct. And about 3 questions. Maybe these are questions to all speakers, and if you allow me, I will reformat this question. So about the transition to clear technologies and implementation of our obligations on the reduction of emissions and the tax on greenhouse gases. So first about the tax, because I can answer this question. As of today in Ukraine, there is a tax for CO2. Maybe this is there are not many countries like this. This is 33 kopecks, and it does not make any pressure on enterprises and do not create stimulus in order to make the production more environmentally friendly. And I would like to say that the ministry now actively works on the implementation of Directive 87 concerning the system of trade, emission trade. And the first step should be the system of monitoring of reporting and verification in order that we got right data and the information about how in Ukraine and how the ministry should move forward and to improve administering of tax or to introduce a trade element to use the system of trading in order to stimulate the instrument of stimulation for the enterprises to become more environmentally friendly. So we work on this issue, work actively with the help of international partners. Not only one partner, but many international organizations. They help us in this, and we have joint work in this area. So brief answer to the question where to get money from. It is important here to get a balance of sustainable development. I believe that our producers should use environmentally friendly technology, and ecology should be viewed by business as opportunities, not as a threat, an opportunity to improve the image at the international level. And I believe that business should understand what requirements of the government and international communities are in order to prepare. This is right, this is correct, this is a sustainable policy about green protectionism, and the European community will, of course, have such requirements towards us. This is understandable even without these roundtables. And how will the government and the power how the government will attract investment in the sphere. It should be thought through. So we understand that we need financing in order that people remain employed, or that we try to make our business more environmentally friendly, and to create conditions for the investment, and our business oligarchs, maybe they will oppose for several years, but it will be impossible for them to do it further because they won't have such an opportunity. That's why we should work together in the strategy, not to lobby just their own interests, their dirty business. They should transform, be more environmentally friendly, and improve the lives of people in Ukraine. And this trend is ongoing. And one of the trends in the exhibition was green cities, smart cities, the cities that become more green, and a lot of technologies and digitalization presented examples. So, and we should demand it from our cities. And when we will start this trend, I believe that we won't stop it. And our task as power, as opposition, we should make everything possible in order to improve conditions for Ukrainian business. Ukraine is in the world trend, and we go along this way, and we know that we have a lot to do. First, this is political will concerning climate issues, and also institutional capabilities should be improved. And I ask each of our speakers to say their final remarks. What steps should be made by each of us in order to provide successful implementation of Ukraine of its international obligations and successful participation in this climate process?
In the Fuel and Energy Committee, we work on improving legislation related to metering, to energy efficiency, to renewables development, and at the level of government, at the level of country, we will try to develop comprehensive strategy of energy consumption, energy generation, and household consumption. Immediately after this event, I go to the Cabinet of Ministers, where our concept of state climate policy is in course of coordination, and maybe the government will pass the strategy, and this will be the first step in implementing our international commitments. So this is my immediate objective for these days. Our biggest objective as civil societies to assist the ministry in developing the strategy, in development of all those interrelated strategies related to renewable sources, to clean energy, etc. I would like to thank to all the participants, all the audience, the speakers. With this, I would like to finish the event, but we have coffee and tea on the underground floor, where you will be able to for networking.